This is a 9 News special presentation. Live from the campus of Northern Kentucky University, WCPO-TV and Legacy present Democracy 2006, the Kentucky 4th District Congressional Debate.
Good evening, everyone. I am Clyde Gray, and welcome to Regents Hall on the campus of Northern Kentucky University. For the next hour and a half, I will moderate tonight's debate for Kentucky's 4th District Congressional seat between candidates Geoff Davis and Ken Lucas. Before we begin, we need to thank Legacy for putting tonight's debate together. Legacy is a group of young professionals from around the tri-state whose mission is to encourage young leaders to embrace the principles of meaningful participation, effective citizenship, and extraordinary imagination to enhance the quality of life and economic well-being in the region. It is my privilege now to introduce our host, Northern Kentucky University President, Dr. James Vitruba, who would like to say a few words to you this evening. Dr. Vitruba.
Thank you, Clyde. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the campus of Northern Kentucky University and to this debate between Congressman Geoff Davis and former Congressman Ken Lucas. We all know that what we're engaged in this evening is a fundamental part of the democratic process. Our nation confronts an array of complex and formidable challenges, both at home and abroad. The winner of this election will be front and center in helping to define our nation's response to these challenges. On a more local level, they will also be asked to help advance the economic and social progress of our region, as defined by Vision 2015. Indeed, this is a most important choice for the voters, and we are pleased that all of you are here. I want to thank both Channel 9 News and our own WNKU radio station for broadcasting the debate live this evening. I also want to thank Legacy for sponsoring this event. Legacy is front and center in planning our region's future, and I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that our future is in great hands. Finally, I encourage you, both the listener and the viewer, to exercise your right to vote this November and to do so in an informed manner. A free society is truly free only when its citizens are willing to participate in the political process. Becoming well informed about the issues and casting your vote are important ways to meet your responsibilities of citizenship. Clyde, thank you, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Dr. Vitruba, thank you very much. Now, before we bring out the candidates this evening, I want to tell you just a little bit about them. Republican Geoff Davis is 47 years old. He attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and served as an Army Ranger, retiring from military service at the rank of captain. Before entering politics, Davis worked as a consultant to manufacturing and high-technology businesses. He has represented the 4th District since 2005, where he serves on the Armed Services and Financial Services Committees. He and his wife, Pat, have been married 23 years. They have 6 children and live in Hebron. Democrat Ken Lucas is 73 years old. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Kentucky, as well as a Master of Business Administration degree from Xavier University. He served in the Air Force, retiring as a major. Before entering politics full-time, Lucas worked as a financial planner. He has served as a Florence City Councilman, Boone County Commissioner, Boone County Judge Executive, and he represented the 4th District from 1999 until 2005. He and his wife, Mary, have been married 45 years. They have 5 adult children and live in Richwood. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the candidates this evening. Joining me in the questioning tonight will be a panel of 4 journalists. They are Kentucky Post Managing Editor Dan Hassert, John Cannon, opinion page editor for The Independent in Ashland, Jamie Baker Nance, editor of the Grant County News, and Patrick Crowley, political writer for the Kentucky Inquirer. Tonight's debate has 6 parts to it. Each candidate will begin with a 4-minute opening statement. The panelists will ask each candidate a question. In the second part, there will be an unmoderated question and answer session with each candidate. In the third segment, the candidates will have the opportunity to rebut each other's answers. And we are really looking forward to the next part, where the candidates will get to question each other. After that, they will each get 4 minutes for a closing statement. The candidates have been provided a copy of the Vision 2015 report. A group of leaders from across northern Kentucky assembled the report to chart a path for growth in the region over the next 10 years by keeping the economy competitive, providing educational excellence, improving the livability of our communities, leading an urban renaissance, governing effectively, and regional stewardship. The candidates have been asked to address these issues in their opening statements. And so we begin tonight. By virtue of a coin toss about an hour ago, Mr. Davis will give the first opening statement. Mr. Davis, you now have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Clyde. Thank you to Legacy for organizing this debate. I appreciate the opportunity to present my views to voters directly and to discuss our many accomplishments during my first term in Congress. Since taking office, I've said many times that our collective goal should be to make northern Kentucky the best place to live and work in the United States. To get there, we need to create the kind of regional cooperation, competitive spirit, and results-oriented leadership embodied in the 6 strategic directions laid out in Vision 2015. For our part, we put partisanship aside to build partnerships for success, working with local elected officials and community leaders at all levels to get things done. Because of our success, we've earned bipartisan support from many local elected officials. I know people aren't happy with some of what's happening in Washington. In my 2 years in office, I've been part of the solution, and I'll continue fighting to change the way Washington does business. My focus has been on getting things done for the 4th District. We brought home funding for critical transportation projects like the Brent Spence Bridge and the Kentucky 8 I-471 interchange, among other transportation projects that will fuel economic growth. We've been able to bring home funding for new water and sewer plants and programs that will help with economic development, as well as funding new technology for our rural hospitals and flood control projects for our rural communities. And we funded the completion of industrial parks that will bring new jobs. But more than funding important projects, we've improved constituent services by creating workshops on federal grant opportunities, on how to pay for college, and on the new Medicare prescription drug benefit. And we opened more offices to put our citizens in easy distance of seeing somebody face to face on issues that they have with the federal government. When others tried and failed on complicated constituent service matters, we refused to take no for an answer until we succeeded. In fact, we worked with local officials in Florence in a bipartisan manner to get the IRS to return funds that had been stolen from the city and were in the embezzler's tax account. We view our office as our constituents' guide to the federal government and are always seeking ways to improve service to better serve you. In my first term, I've seen legislative success by working with members of both parties to solve problems. I introduced legislation that was recently signed into law by the President that will protect our troops from the predatory sales of uncompetitive and excessively expensive financial products like contractual mutual funds and unnecessary life insurance. I worked as a conferee on the National Defense Authorization Act to expand Senate language to protect our troops from all types of predatory lending. And I authored bipartisan legislation that's been approved by the Financial Services Committee that will save the government $2 billion and reform and revitalize America's affordable rural housing programs. This bill would help about 1,000 families in Kentucky. Those are just a few of the solutions that we've offered. Through honest efforts to find problems and solve them, and by improving service, I've worked hard to earn your confidence. The stakes are huge in this election. The person you elect to Congress this November may be the deciding vote in who controls the House. If you believe, as I do, that we should make the tax cuts permanent, then you should vote for me. I want to continue the economic policies that have created millions of new jobs, increase tax revenue by creating more taxpayers, and cutting our deficit in half. The leadership of the other party has stated unequivocally that no tax cut is worthy of continuing. They've stated that raising taxes will be high on their agenda. If you believe, as I do, that we must win in the Middle East, then you should vote for me. Regardless of how you felt about our going into Iraq, Islamic extremists declare that it is the front line in the war on terror. Now that we're there, we simply can't allow that country to fall to Islamic extremists to create a new sanctuary from which they'll launch attacks on Western interests around the globe. I look forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you for taking time to watch, and I would ask for your vote and support in November.
Mr. Davis, thank you very much. We will now hear from Mr. Lucas. You have 4 minutes for your opening statement, sir.
Thank you, Clyde. My thanks to our sponsor, Legacy, for organizing this event. Legacy was created by Forward Quest, and I was privileged to serve as the first chairman of Forward Quest. We thank our audience here and for our viewers at home for tuning in. Also, my thanks to Dr. Vitruba and Northern Kentucky University for holding this event. It is fitting that this debate be held here at NKU. This university is in the very center of all the good things happening in our community. I have many fond memories about the 23 years I served on the Board of Regents here. Some of the best were seeing many graduates walk across this very stage to get their diplomas. I'm a lifelong Kentuckian, and I grew up on a tobacco and dairy farm in Grant County. It was there that I learned the values of faith, family, and hard work. I worked my way through the University of Kentucky, and I served my country as a pilot in the Air Force and the Air National Guard. After coming home from the service, it was natural for me to get involved in the civic affairs of this community. That involvement has spanned over a period of 4 decades. The Almighty has blessed Mary and me with 5 great kids and their spouses who have given us 11 grandchildren. As you might imagine, our family is the center of our universe. As some of you know, when I first ran for Congress in 1998, I pledged to serve only 3 consecutive terms. After serving those 6 years, I felt a duty, an honored duty, to limit the term limits pledged, so I stepped down in 2005. It's important that public officials keep their word. In the months after leaving Congress, I became very frustrated and concerned about what was happening in our world, our country, and in our Congress. Congress had simply stopped trying to get things done on important pocketbook issues. Congress was doing nothing to address the rising cost of health care and prescription drugs. Congress was providing no oversight for the war in Iraq. And Congress was so mired in corruption and sleaze that they failed to pass any meaningful immigration reform. We truly have a do-nothing Congress. This Congress is more concerned with keeping its power and covering up for one another than looking out for the people of this great nation. For a while, I thought it was just me that was frustrated. Then I realized that many others shared my frustrations and concerns. After much encouragement from my supporters, friends, and family, I accepted the challenge to run again. Folks, this country is going in the wrong direction. Our current Congress is part of the problem. My opponent is part of the problem. If I am privileged to serve again, I will do my very best to get this nation back on the right track again. The stakes could not be higher. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Mr. Lucas, thank you very much. In this next segment, each panelist will ask a candidate a question, and the candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. Our first question is for Mr. Lucas from Dan Hassert of the Kentucky Post. Dan?
Thank you, Clyde. Mr. Lucas, this is Governing 101. Be responsive to local officials back home. You were in Congress for 6 years, your opponent for 2. Yet some local government officials, including the Democratic mayor of Covington, the largest city here, have testified publicly that your opponent provided better service to them. What is your response to their assessment?
Well, certainly that is his privilege to get whoever he wants to support him. I can tell you that I've had 6 Republican office holders in northern Kentucky tell me that they're supporting me. But because of the pressures of this being a very Republican community, that they will not be public about it, because they said, we don't like Mr. Davis and his style and how he's is representing us in Washington. So I think, there are people on both sides. I have a lot of Republican support, and I'm very happy to have that Republican support, and obviously a lot of Democratic support and independent support. I know that the mayor said that I did nothing when 250 jobs were leaving the IRS to go somewhere else. We talked to the IRS, and they said, we've got to move these jobs. We don't have any choice. Now, that didn't make the mayor happy, but I can't do anything about that IRS that runs their own shop. And I tried, and it just didn't work.
Mr. Lucas, thank you. John Kennan of the Independent of Ashland poses the next question to Mr. Davis. John?
Okay, Mr. Davis, you champion the Personal Financial Services Protection Act to protect our military personnel from those companies and individuals who out to make an easy buck off of them. Yet you oppose the provision to cap interest rates at 36% on loans to military. This cap was supported by the Pentagon, veterans organizations, consumer groups, and just about everybody but the payday lenders. Who benefited most from your opposition? Was it the soldiers, who are often young and gullible and desperate for money? Or was it the payday lenders, who some of whom gave you nice campaign gifts?
No bias in your question there, John. I think one thing that we can say very categorically, when I introduced that bill, it had two titles that passed overwhelmingly out of the House. First, comprehensive protection against predatory sales practices of financial products, and then a Title II with comprehensive bans on payday lending. When it went to the Senate, for whatever reason, they took the second title out of the bill and chose to insert a weaker amendment with an APR cap of 36% that only covered payday lending. As a conferee, I was concerned about the needs of the soldiers, and in consultation with the military, we brought an umbrella cap that took all fees, like installment loan companies like Pioneer Military Lending, that does 100% of its business with the military, has a 36% APR cap, but also has origination fees, unneeded credit insurance, auto club memberships, and other fees that are added on to them that actually are exorbitantly high. What we got was a great solution that encompasses all fees of any kind rolled in to the APR. And the military is happy with it, the soldiers are happy with it, and I got a call from one of my friends in the Army to say thank you, because they just kicked a bunch of folks off post out of soldier common areas that were trying to sell these products to our troops.
All right, Mr. Davis, thank you. Jamie Baker Nance of the Grant County News has the next question. This one goes to Mr. Lucas.
Yes. Thank you, Clyde. There seems to be no shortage of negative campaign ads. Two in particular, one accuses you of writing letters requesting leniency for Mr. Erpenbeck, and another that while in Congress, you voted to cut Social Security benefits. Are these true? And if so, why did you choose these courses of action?
Jamie, I'm glad you asked that question. My opponent has said I support giving food stamps to illegal immigrants. That's a lie. My opponent says I support Social Security benefits for illegal immigrants. That's a lie. And you said yourself, this Bill Erpenbeck commercial, that commercial would lead you to believe that I wrote a letter for Bill Erpenbeck. I did not write a letter for Bill Erpenbeck. But see, you yourself said you wrote a letter for Bill Erpenbeck. That shows the intent of that commercial. And all I'm saying is my opponent will do anything short of murder to try to win this election and misrepresent this in every way that he can. Because you yourself said, you wrote a letter for Bill Erpenbeck. I absolutely did not. That's a lie. But that's the distortion in these campaigns. They're desperate, and they're working in every way that they can to defeat me.
Mr. Lucas, thank you. We have a question now from Patrick Crowley of the, I'll get it right in a minute, Patrick Crowley of the Kentucky Inquirer. He asks a question of Mr. Davis. Patrick.
Thank you, Clyde. Mr. Davis, Congressman, you did write, you are running an ad referring to a letter Mr. Lucas wrote on behalf of John Finnan, who was one of the convicted bankers in the Erpenbeck scandal. But you yourself have taken money from members of Congress who have been indicted, convicted, and even in jail. You've been called on repeatedly to give that money back that they've given you. You did give money back from Mark Foley, who, of course, has his problems, but he hasn't been convicted of a crime. Why haven't you given that money back from DeLay, Cunningham, and Ney?
Well, the reality is, Patrick, those contributions were legally raised and they were legally spent in the past. The one point that I would make in this is my opponent's attacks on me in this area are simply hypocritical. He was cited by the FEC for receiving $30,000 in illegal contributions from a union and intervened in the criminal sentencing of a banker convicted of bank fraud in the largest bank fraud case and embezzlement case in the history of northern Kentucky. And I think really this distracts from the issues that we need to be talking about right now to strengthen our borders, to improve national security, and to create jobs in northern Kentucky.
All right. Mr. Davis, thank you for that. In our next segment, the candidates will now each face a 4-minute question and answer session twice from different members of our panel. Jamie Baker Nance of the Grant County News is first up, questioning Mr. Davis for 4 minutes.
First question. The illegal immigration problem is different for citizens of Kentucky than, let's say, those in Texas. What is the balance between the two?
I think fundamentally we have two basic issues. The first thing that we need to do is secure our borders. We have a very serious problem with transit on the southern borders, and we've taken serious steps in the House, appropriating funding to increase the size of the Border Patrol by 1,500 agents, funding the appropriate barrier construction, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems necessary to slow that down, because we have a criminal problem with gangs like MS-13 that have come to Kentucky in the last 2 years. The second issue that we have is reforming the system. We're a nation of immigrants, but also a nation of laws. And what we want to do and are working on is a system that will simplify the means of legal immigrants coming here to work and also provide a means for employers to be held harmless for government inefficiency, but strong penalties for criminal violators. For example, I've introduced a no-match bill to help employers, when they receive an immigrant coming in, that can verify that Social Security number instantly rather than having that hang out in the ether for weeks or months or possibly never be verified.
Let's talk about the barrier construction. History would tell us that neither the Great Wall of China nor the Berlin Wall were successful. Why will this one be?
Well, I think history would tell us that the Great Wall of China was in fact quite successful in the Qing dynasty in protecting them for centuries. The Berlin Wall was an entirely different issue. Barrier construction works. I've seen it in peace enforcement overseas. I've also been told by members of the Border Patrol themselves who have constructed barriers with their own resources internally that they cut down alien transit in their areas and also criminal transit. In one particular stretch, one Border Patrol agent who I know told me they built a fence that cut their weekly arrests from 1,500 a week down to 50, channeling aliens to other areas where they could be more effectively deterred or picked up.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the war in Iraq. How many U.S. soldiers have died this month? Do you know?
I believe that 17 soldiers have died this month. 17?
It's more like 71. What is the solution when this seems to be a civil war, and do we have a place in that?
Well, I think we have to remember all of the attacks of Islamic extremists upon this nation. On September 11th, 3,000 Americans were murdered by Islamic extremists. They say that Iraq is the center in the war on terror right now. I was down with 4,000 soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division this past Monday, in fact, standing with one young man who was in a firefight with a soldier who was killed, whose family I know. And they were very clear in their belief in the mission and the importance of keeping the war on terror over there. There are tactical and strategic adaptations that we certainly need to make, but that nonetheless makes the point clear to me that I want to keep that fight over there rather than have it come to our shores here.
The American-led crackdown in Baghdad, though, has not succeeded in quelling violence across the capital, and a new approach is needed, it's been said. A military spokesman actually said that today. What is your solution?
I believe there's a controversy within the military right now between the Special Operations Command and Civil Affairs folks and conventional military. I lean towards the special operations people who believe in having units more embedded and a part of the communities to build local relationships and provide round-the-clock security in areas as we're standing up the Iraqi security forces. I think in the end what we're going to see is creative, tactical, and strategic adaptations against a creative and tactical insurgency, but there are hopeful signs.
All right, Mr. Davis, thank you. That concludes this question segment. Patrick Crowley of the Kentucky Inquirer now faces off with Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Clyde. Mr. Lucas, you did write that letter for John Finnan, who was one of the convicted bankers in the Erpenbeck housing scandal. Why did you write that letter, and do you regret writing it on congressional letterhead?
I absolutely do not regret writing that letter. First of all, John Finnan was an outstanding community servant in this community. good guy, highly respected by people who knew him through 25 years of banking and public service. I got a letter from him, and he sent one to me and others asking if I would write to the judge, because John Finnan was guilty. He should serve time, and he should be in jail, and I agree to that. But I felt, that John, who was led an exemplary life while he was a civic servant in this community, my staff said, why would you write this letter for John Finnan? He's not an ally. He's not a friend of yours. He's not a supporter of yours. I said, that doesn't make any difference. As far as I know, John didn't support me. He never gave me any money. But I felt it was the right thing to do because it was a compassionate act.
Thank you. If you're elected and the Democrats retake the House, what is your plan for Iraq? Should soldiers start coming home now?
Well, Pat, I think that Iraq, I don't agree with some of the people in our party when they talk about we should have a timetable. I don't believe that we should. However, we must win the war in Iraq. We have no choice except to win it. But we shouldn't have any artificial timelines. And another thing, this Republican Congress, one of their jobs is oversight of the executive branch. They have done absolutely no oversight, made no critical questions, and they're dysfunctional in that regard.
You were in Congress and you voted for the war and supported it. Didn't you have a watchdog role at that time as well, and shouldn't you have asked some critical questions?
You know what? My president and commander-in-chief got us into a room and he said, do you want to see a mushroom cloud over Washington, D.C. or New York? And you know what? I didn't need anything else. When my commander-in-chief told me that the danger was that imminent, I went with him on good faith. It was a vote that I later regret, as you know.
Are you saying he lied about that or misled you on that?
I'm saying that I was misled, and I don't know who did the misleading, but certainly I felt defrauded about what happened in that war after everything that came out. Yes.
The Dow hit a record 12,000 today. Unemployment is down. The economy is doing fairly well. What are the Democrats going to do differently, and why should voters make a change right now based on the economy?
A very good reason, Pat. The separation between the wealth of the rich and the working people is getting greater and greater and greater. The bulk of the people in this country are hard-working, working people, and they don't have anybody representing them now because his party is a party of big money, and big money, if you don't know this, rules in Washington, D.C. It rules.
If the Democrats take over, you think people in this district want Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, and are you going to support her?
I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I'll deal with whoever my selections are. Nancy Pelosi and I don't agree on a lot of things. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-gun. She's not. I'm against gay marriage. So there are a lot of things that we disagree on.
Would you support her?
We'll see what happens. She may not be the only choice.
Thank you. Okay. Let me ask you, do you think Iraq has erupted into a civil war?
I don't think there's any question about it. Now Mr. Davis, who throws out a lot of facts and figures, but he got his death toll in October a little mixed up. Instead of 17, as he said, there's 71. I think he's dyslexic or something. But anyway, he minimizes what's going on in Iraq. And let me say, Patrick, that Mr. Davis said on the House floor in November.
Mr. Lucas, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'm going to have to step in now. Time is up for this segment. Our next Q&A is between the Kentucky Post's Dan Hassert and Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Clyde. Mr. Davis, a quick summary of the national budget. Record federal deficits, a record national debt, the largest per capita increase in federal spending since the Great Society. Where is the fiscal conservatism?
This fiscal conservative has worked to assure that in each of the last 2 years there's been a reduction in real spending of non-defense, non-homeland security funds. One thing that I would point to is the fact that we're in a time of war right now, and that policies, fiscal policies to allow people to keep more of their own money has in fact worked, because the deficit was cut in half this year because of increased tax revenues due to increased number of taxpayers. We need to continue to eliminate government waste, focus on programs that bring return and generate taxpayers, and frankly, I've been a constant advocate of having sunsets on all programs so they prove their business value.
The deficit was cut in half compared to last year, or compared to what it was when you all took office?
The deficit was projected this year to be $500 billion. It came in at $248 billion.
Okay, well, health care, education, foreign policy, that's what the country needs. Yet over the last few years, the Republican Party has focused more attention on issues like gay marriage, flag burning, the Pledge of Allegiance, and Terri Schiavo. Is the GOP a party of substance, or is this a party more concerned with scoring political points?
Well, I saw a few days when the latter issues, the social issues that you discussed were there, but the weeks and months and 2 years were consumed on working on health care policy, job creation policy, and strengthening our national defense.
Well, here, let's go back closer to home here. This is a frequent topic of conversation when political junkies gather. Why is Geoff Davis here? Who sent him to Northern Kentucky and why? What's their agenda? In a nutshell, there seems to be a mystery why you first came to the state and then to the region to set up shop and to pursue a political career. Could you shed some light on why you came to select Kentucky as a place to live?
I think that urban legend about me is right out of the movie The Island, bloggers supposing that I was raised in a pod 7 years ago. You know, the reality of this is I've lived in Kentucky with my wife. We've had our children here and started a business here for 17 years. I'm simply being condemned for being a working-class kid that joined the Army, earned an appointment to the military academy, served successfully, and came to put my roots in Kentucky when my wife and I fell in love with it when we passed through here in the Army.
Well, let's go back to the war. Can somebody criticize the war and still be a patriot, and if so, under what circumstances?
I believe that somebody can be critical of policy of the war and still be patriotic in their motivation. What I have shared in our republic is that it's important, as I told you at the editorial board, that we understand that there are more people watching than just members of the House or folks at home. Our troops in the field are watching this debate, and their morale is affected, and also our enemies are watching and can be encouraged or discouraged by their misperception or perception of us here. The key in the long run is to make sure that we understand all parties that are watching this debate share our views in a manner that's going to ultimately affect the best policy and reflect the will of the American people in the end.
It seems to be that you're suggesting that the Congress is not a place to debate the war. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think there have been plenty of debates on the war and continuing debate in the Armed Services Committee. Contrary to the earlier statement, I participated in numerous oversight hearings on a wide variety of issues ranging from doctrinal policy, addressing ways to more effectively assist our troops, changing regulations to make sure that they could more clearly do their mission, and ultimately holding commanders accountable from the field who are executing policy in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right, Mr. Davis, thank you very much. John Kennan of the Independent in Ashland now has 4 minutes of back and forth with Mr. Lucas.
Okay. There's been a lot of criticism in regards to the Iraq War of Donald Rumsfeld. Does he need to be replaced as Secretary of Defense?
I don't think there's any question about that, John. I mean, we've got to win this war in Iraq, and I think this guy has been like a bull in the china shop. He doesn't take any advice from anyone. You read this from all accounts. I think people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, feel that way. But I think the only way we win the war in Iraq is for there to be a bipartisan solution. Democrats and Republicans alike come together with a solution. It's obvious what we're doing is not working. We've had generals in the field say that today on the television. We've had Republicans who come back from Iraq and say, we've got to change our course. At some point in time, we're going to have to come up with some alternatives. And in the meantime, we've lost 2,700 precious young men and women, 2,000 people injured, like we say, 71 or 72 people killed so far this month, the second highest total in the last 2 years. So, go ahead.
One impact of the war has been a change in role for the National Guard, which used to be weekend soldiers, but I don't believe there's hardly a single one that hasn't been called into active duty during the war, and now the ones in Ashland went to Homeland Security on bases, but a lot of them have gone to Iraq and now to the border patrol.
Right.
Are they being overused? Are we too overly dependent on them?
Well, they are, but we don't have any choice, John. I mean, we need these people in the various and sundry places, and let's face it, a lot of the generals in Iraq say we need more troops there, but we don't seem to have them. So we're in a real dilemma, and we've got to change the course, and we've got to work this system because our guardsmen and reservists are being, they're basically full-time people, and their lives are wrecked. They're at home with jobs. They leave these jobs and come back, and it's unconscionable that we keep using them, but we really don't have much choice, John.
Okay, I'm from an area of the district that's economically quite different than this part of the district, and that we have lost a lot of good-paying jobs, good-paying manufacturing jobs, and a lot of people are working for less money than they did 10 years ago.
Correct.
Would you support an increase in the minimum wage?
Absolutely. Our minimum wage is $5.15. It hasn't been raised since 1997, and it needs to be up to at least $7. Now, my opponent voted against the minimum wage last year. This year, at election time, with another caveat in there with some tax breaks for the rich, he voted for it, but that was an election time ploy. You know, he's been against the minimum wage, and I'm for the minimum wage straight up without any attachments to it. Yes, I'm for a minimum wage.
Okay, an aspect of the immigration thing is we have a plant in Grayson, ConAgra, that fortunately did not move its manufacturing plant overseas or into another country, but it imported all of its workers. More than 3/4 of its hourly workers are from Mexico, and that's been quite a strain on Grayson, which has to have a bilingual police force. And what do you do about a plant that's really essentially a Mexican plant in the heart of Appalachia?
Well,
let me do this before you answer, because unfortunately we've run out of time. I thought I was going to have a first tonight where I cut off a reporter. It didn't happen that way. But we'll move on to our next segment now, and we'll let our viewers ponder what that answer might have been. Now, each candidate will have 90 seconds each to answer a question, and 30 seconds each for a rebuttal. Again, 90 seconds to answer the question. Each candidate will then follow up with 30 seconds of rebuttal. Patrick Crowley has the first question this round that goes to Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas, what should Congress do about immigration? Should there be a work program or amnesty program for illegal immigrants that are here?
First of all, I don't believe in amnesty in any form. We need to secure the borders. We need to cut down on these employers that are hiring these illegal workers. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to implement the 9/11 Commission recommendations that have been out there for a long time but have been failed to be implemented. You know, again, on immigration reform, my opponent has said that I gave food stamps to illegal immigrants. That's a lie. He said I've given Social Security to illegal immigrants. That's a lie. And, you know, I think basically what they're doing is putting up a smokescreen, because the Republican Congress has the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. If they wanted to pass meaningful immigration reform, they could have done it. They were in control of everything. But instead of that, they just have hearings so they don't have to deal with it.
What about a guest worker program? You have employers in this area that
I absolutely think a properly implemented guest worker program is the right thing to do for seasonal help, without question, and I would be for that.
Mr. Lucas, thank you. Mr. Davis, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, I think my opponent's vote against the or for the implementation of the treaty was a vote against preventing illegal aliens from getting, in fact, Social Security benefits, because it would give them credit for time in this country illegally. If they came back under legal status in some vein, for example, having worked for 10 years illegally and managed to attain legal status, they would get credit for all of the years that they were here illegally. And very clearly, that's an abuse of the system, and that needs to be brought to an end.
All right. And Mr. Lucas, you now have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, again, my big concern about the lies about the immigration is that I don't know that my opponent knows the difference between legal and illegal. What I supported was food stamps for legal immigrants, and food stamps and Social Security benefits for legal immigrants. And it's just an out-and-out lie, what he's come up with about what I've had to say. It's a total misrepresentation of who I am, and I think they're desperate.
All right. Mr. Lucas, thank you very much. And 30 seconds now to rebut from Mr. Davis.
Well, I believe the record speaks for itself. I think when we talk about legality and illegality, that trends into some interesting areas. The bottom line is the people of this country need a strong and secure border plan. We're beginning to implement that. We need to bring about a basic pilot change that will allow us to get legal workers here. clean up the system and make sure that we don't create a situation that subsidizes those who come to this country illegally.
All right, Mr. Davis, thank you very much. Grant County News editor Jamie Baker Nance now has a question for Mr. Davis. 90-second answer.
Yes, the expansion of Lake Williamstown is of vital economic importance not only to Grant County but the entire region. Money has been appropriated for a study, but it's going to take a lot more money. What will you do to move the project along, and are there other regional projects you pledge to support?
The Lake Williamstown project is the largest energy and water project that we are supporting in the 4th District. I believe it's vital not only from a safety standpoint with the erosion of the dam, but also from a water supply standpoint, and most importantly from the standpoint of economic development. I brought House leadership in to see the dam. I brought all of my Washington staff so that they can understand as they're advocating and making the business case that it's a critical need of the region. More than that, we talk about Vision 2015. I believe the Lake Williamstown project, a crown jewel in the greatest place to live in America.
All right, Mr. Davis. Mr. Lucas, you now have 90 seconds to answer the same question.
There's no question that the Lake Williamstown project is of huge importance. When I was in Congress, I worked with the engineers to start the initial studies on that because I realized the importance of that. As you know, I grew up in Grant County. I have a special place in my heart for that area, as you always do when you grow up there. I'm prejudiced about that. But I will make the Lake Williamstown project, if I'm elected, a top priority water project in this entire district.
All right, Mr. Davis, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Not only have we made Grant County a priority, we've opened an office in Williamstown to be able to serve the community closely. And I believe our support for Lake Williamstown and other infrastructure projects and the results that we've gotten is the reason that the mayor of Williamstown has come out and publicly endorsed me in this race.
And Mr. Lucas, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I think that, number one, Mr. Davis talks about opening an office in Williamstown. He opened one in Maysville. But strangely enough, he opened those offices 15 months after he was in office, a few months after I announced that he had competition. It's a little unfortunate in my mind that he's opening up these offices for political gain at the expense of the taxpayers. You know, the taxpayers pay for those offices. And we were always very proud of our constituent services, and we will be again.
Mr. Lucas, thank you very much.
Okay.
I apologize for having to cut you off, but John Cannon of the Independent of Ashland now has our next question for Mr. Lucas, and 90 seconds to respond.
There's been a lot of debate about a lot of ethical problems in Congress, and there's been a lot of discussion about reforms of ethics. How can, what do you think Congress needs to do to assure that?
Well, John, I think when you have one party in power, it breeds corruption. That's happened before in other years. It happened years back to the Democrats, and it's certainly happening to the Republicans now. I mean, we have a culture of corruption there. We have the lobbyists run Washington. There have been a huge increase in the number of lobbyists in Washington in the last few years. And trust me, they write a lot of the legislation. They not only influence it, they write it. And don't be misled that big money rules that town. Mr. Davis has taken $45,000 from 3 convicted criminals and felons. He sees nothing wrong with that. I don't understand why you don't see something wrong with people who are in jail, who've been indicted. Tom DeLay, he resigned in disgrace and left Congress, and he's under injunction. Mr. Davis did give back $1,000 from Congressman Foley, who was a sexual predator in Florida. I don't know how he drew the distinction where he gave $1,000 back to him and wouldn't give $45,000 back to these other people who were convicted felons and criminals. You know, I stand up to the members of my own party. Mr. Davis has gotten almost every Republican leader that you can think of coming in here raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for him.
And
who do you think he's going to answer to?
I'll have to interrupt again at that point. We'll now give Mr. Davis 90 seconds to answer the same question.
In my 2 years in Congress, I've always supported strong and comprehensive lobbying reform. The lobbying reform bill died in the Senate ultimately, but I do find a mild irony in the statement since my opponent was cited by the Federal Election Commission for taking $30,000 in illegal campaign contributions and used the power of his office to intervene in the criminal sentence of a banker convicted of bank fraud when doing nothing for the hundreds of victims.
All right, Mr. Davis, thank you. You have 30 seconds to rebut Mr. Lucas.
First of all, I would write a letter of support for John Finnan again if I had the chance, because it was just a matter of compassion for an individual who had lived a great life but got tied up in a web. Also, the $30,000 he talks about from the carpenters, that's a lie. It's not an illegal contribution. Did the carpenters get in trouble for some of the things they did and for other reasons? Yes. But we did not take one dime of an illegal contribution from them or anyone else. It's another lie.
Mr. Lucas, thank you, sir. Mr. Davis, you now have 30 seconds to rebut.
The reality here is that we've laid the truth out. But more importantly, we're going to continue to press for comprehensive lobbying reform, making sure that people are held accountable for their actions, and making sure that the highest standards of ethical conduct are upheld in the House of Representatives.
All right, Mr. Davis. Kentucky Post Assistant Managing Editor Dan Hassert now has a question for Mr. Davis, and a reminder that you each have 90 seconds to answer this, and then we get to the rebuttals, just so everyone gets their full time.
Thank you, Clyde. Mr. Davis, shortest question of the night. What should the United States do with North Korea?
Because of my prior work in the military, I was asked to chair a largely closed panel studying emerging nuclear threats that focused on Iran and North Korea. The real key in that unstable state is to work with every possible diplomatic option that we have, as well as keeping possible military options on the table, not with the intent of using them, but understanding that that deterrent has to be in place by all parties concerned. The six-party talks have continued the dialogue moving on, but North Korea's provocative actions, though a failed launch and a failed implosion of a nuclear device, the one thing that we need to do is make sure that we work closely with Japan, with China, with South Korea, and with the Chinese. The Chinese have been critical because they control the main imports into North Korea of energy and food.
All right, we have 90 seconds now for Mr. Lucas to respond to that same question.
Well, Clyde, Kim Jong-il is a madman, and he's a dangerous person. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he has a nuclear capacity, because they're so hard up for money, that he would sell it to rogue nations. So we have a very serious problem there. But I agree that we need to work with these other countries. China can put the most leverage on them because North Korea really depends on them a whole lot for a lot of resources. But the other thing that I'd like to say, getting back to Mr. Davis when he talks about his military expertise, he said on the House floor when someone was questioning the administration on the progress of the war in Iraq, I will quote, on November the 5th, on November of 2005, Mr. Davis said, anyone who questions the administration on the progress of the war, and I quote, despicable, dishonorable, uninformed, unhistorical, anti-intellectual, and frankly un-American. I think there are plenty of patriotic Americans who have a right to question what's going on in this war. And I really take offense to that. That just shows that he is a party hack. He does whatever the administration wants right down the line.
Mr. Lucas, thank you for that response. Mr. Davis, you now have 30 seconds to rebut.
Coming back to the question that was originally asked, we have serious security risks in East Asia, and it's very important that we work together in East Asia with our trading partners, with our allies, to come up with what hopefully will be a diplomatic solution to manage a peaceful transition. I'm hopeful through proper utilization of both military and political resources, we'll be able to accomplish that. But in the end, the greatest contrast is between the darkness in the north and the openness and the free market democratic economy in the south.
Mr. Davis, thank you. Mr. Lucas, you now have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, again, I think the situation there is critical. And I think, again, that we need to rely on the partners in that part of the world, China in particular, to do whatever they can to exert pressures and sanctions on North Korea. I think they're in the best position to bring North Korea around because North Korea's economy is in very, very bad shape. And I believe if we do those sanctions and naval blockades, we can bring them around.
Mr. Lucas, thank you very much. Panel, thank you as well for your questions this evening. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's all fasten our seatbelts because we're at the point now where the candidates are about to question each other. There will be 90-second answers for the initial, or 90 seconds rather, for the answer, and a 1-minute rebuttal. We're going to begin now with Mr. Lucas, who gets to ask the first question, giving Mr. Davis 90 seconds to respond.
Mr. Davis, your position on Social Security keeps changing. In 2002, you were 100% in favor of a risky plan to privatize. In 2004, you reversed that position. Then right after you were sworn in last year, you endorsed private accounts again. Why can't you just admit that you're for privatizing Social Security?
You've continually mischaracterized my position on Social Security privatization. I oppose privatization. In fact, your good friend, Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, in a letter to President Bush opposing the President's privatization plan, clearly cited me as a member of the President's own party who opposed privatization. Moreover, and more interestingly to me, is in an article that appeared in the Cincinnati Enquirer, for which I was attacked by members of my own party about my opposition to privatization, the headline read, "Davis bucks Bush on Social Security," something I think you've conveniently forgot.
Mr. Lucas, you now have 60 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, Mr. Davis, that was in 2004 when you reversed your position. And you reversed it again after you went back to Congress this time. So I don't question the fact that you reversed your position. And I can quote you from 3 newspaper articles. In 2001, Enquirer says, supports the creation of private investment accounts for people paying into Social Security. 2002, National Taxpayers Union supports obligatory personally controlled retirement accounts. 2005, Courier Journal supports George Bush's plan to revamp Social Security. Are all these papers wrong?
All right, Mr. Lucas, thank you for that. Mr. Davis, you now have a question to ask of Mr. Lucas, and Mr. Lucas, you have 90 seconds to respond to that question.
Mr. Lucas, your party leadership has said that if the Democrats retake the majority, that impeaching President Bush will be high on the agenda, along with rolling back every single one of the Bush tax cuts and setting a date for immediate withdrawal from Iraq. Where are you on those issues, and what influence will you have with your party on those issues?
Number one, I am not for impeaching President Bush. Number two, I am not for a timetable to withdraw from Iraq. And what was the third part?
Let's talk about the tax cuts.
The tax cuts. I voted for the tax cuts before. I'll vote for them again. I'm an independent voter. I have been. I always will be. I was there for 6 years, and I won't change when I go back.
If my opponent's, the truth is that if my opponent's party regains control of Congress, Nancy Pelosi of San Francisco will become Speaker. They'll make John Conyers chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and tops on his agenda is, in fact, the beginning of impeachment proceedings against the President. That's according to his own statements. Charlie Rangel will chair the Ways and Means Committee, and he said that every one of the Bush tax cuts would be allowed to expire, and John Murtha could become majority leader, and he wants to begin immediate withdrawal from Iraq. I think those agenda items are out of step with most of America and with Kentucky.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lucas, now your question for Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, you will have 90 seconds to respond.
Mr. Davis, I voted against increasing salaries for members of Congress every time it came up, 6 times, even in times when we had a balanced budget. And of course, that's a far cry from what we've got now, since we've got a $250,000 deficit this year. Within 6 months after taking office, you voted yourself a big pay raise. How can you possibly justify that?
Well, first of all, the truth is I did not vote for a pay raise. The nonpartisan Congressional Research Service stated clearly on the vote that's in the attack ads on television right now was not a vote on increasing member pay, nor was it a vote to increase or decrease member pay. What it in fact was a vote to proceed to further debate on the Treasury Transportation Appropriations Bill, which I might add was voted for also by Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi and Minority Leader Steny Hoyer.
Mr. Lucas, you now have 60 seconds to respond.
Well, okay, Mr. Davis, you can't fool me. I was there 6 times. When you get into a politically sensitive issue like a pay raise, everybody on the floor knows that's an issue. Don't kid yourself. Everybody knows that. And for you to say that you didn't know and you were hiding behind the rest of that bill is just a bunch of stuff. Also, the next year, when you had an opponent, me, you voted against the pay raise. And it was the same setup, same kind of a bill. How come that you voted for it in the first year when you had no competition, and the second year when you had competition?
All right, Mr. Lucas, we appreciate that. Another question now for Mr. Lucas from Mr. Davis.
Mr. Lucas, I'd like you to share with us here tonight what bill that you authored, introduced, and passed in Congress that became law are you most proud of?
I'll tell you what, I was involved in several things that I'm very proud of in Congress. I voted for TRICARE improvement for the veterans. It was my original bill that was incorporated in the Defense Authorization Act in 2000. I set up original bill on the Social Security lockbox to lock in the surplus when we had one into Social Security lockbox. And that didn't pass because I was a Democrat. But a Republican put up the same bill and it passed. I voted for mine. I voted for his because I'm a bipartisan guy. It was the right thing to do. So I'm very proud of my record and all the different projects that we got and the money we got back in the district for very important projects.
Mr. Davis, your 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. My Democratic friends have introduced bills. We've seen it, Democrats have introduced bipartisan bills that have become law in the Congress. And the truth is that you've never introduced a bill that's become law. The Inquirer pointed out that you were the least active legislator in the 107th Congress. And of every member of Congress, every member of the U.S. House, you accomplished the least in the 2 years of 2001 and 2002. And I believe that we can do better. And in this past Congress, the 4th District has.
Mr. Lucas, now your question for Mr. Davis.
Mr. Davis, you've taken campaign money from criminals that served in Congress. You've taken money from Duke Cunningham and Bob Ney, 2 former members who pled guilty to accepting bribes, and Tom DeLay, who was indicted for public mistrust, and he's resigned. You refuse to give it back. What kind of a behavior is that, and why do you think people have lost faith in Congress when you've kept this dirty money?
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to respond to that. I think one thing is clear. Every contribution that we had taken that my opponent questions was money that was legally raised and legally spent. He conveniently forgets the fact that he was cited, and his campaign was cited by the Federal Election Commission for taking $30,000 in illegal contributions from a union. Moreover, Democrats who contributed to him have also had their personal difficulties, both with the Federal Election Commission and in their own lives. I think the bigger issue here, though, when we talk of character and integrity, is simply this. Is it right to use the official office of the United States House of Representatives to intervene in a criminal case in criminal sentencing for a person who is convicted of bank fraud while neglecting the victims?
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Lucas, you now have 60 seconds to respond.
You know, if I had that opportunity again, I would do it again as an act of compassion for a fellow. This fellow didn't even support me. He never gave me any money, but I did it because he was a good servant in the community, and you know, I would do it again. Also, you keep on saying that $30,000, it was not an illegal contribution. That is a lie. Was the Carpenters Union punished for things they did other than that? Absolutely. But you proved to me that that was an illegal contribution. It's another one of your lies. You're desperate.
Our final question now is from Mr. Lucas for Mr. Davis.
You know, Mr. Davis, you vote with your party's leadership 96% of the time. When I was in Congress, I didn't consider any of my votes Democratic or Republican. I voted for what I thought was best for the people. Why are you so partisan?
No emotion in that question. The reality is this is a conservative district, and I'm a conservative congressman, and it would be expected that I would vote for conservative policies just as you did when you were a member of Congress. The reality is I've stood up for the 4th District, and I've stood up to my own party and to our president on issues that matter to our citizens, opposing Social Security privatization, working with budget issues to assure that our small towns get community development block grants, opposing the President's policy on immigration, and also opposing the President's policy on port security. The issue here is representation of the values of this district, and I have done that faithfully during my time in Congress.
Mr. Davis, thank you. Mr. Lucas, you now have 60 seconds for a rebuttal.
Mr. Davis, you talk a good game, but when the smoke clears away, you vote for your party 96% of the time. I can understand that when all the leadership comes in here and raises money for you. Who are you going to answer to? Viv, I've always been a very independent voter. I was a very conservative member of Congress. In fact, a lot of the people on the left side of my party complained about I was so conservative. When the people scored my votes, they were somewhere around 50-50, sometimes 52-48, 51-49, 50-50, but that wasn't important to me. I never looked to see whether I voted, whether it was for a Democrat or a Republican bill. I voted for what I thought was best for the people of my district, and that's why I was independent, and that's my strength, and I stand by it.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That concludes our debate. The candidates now each have 4 minutes to give a closing statement. We begin with Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Clyde. You know, folks, we've got a real mess on our hands. Congress didn't get anything done that the American people really care about. Congress is just too partisan. My opponent has gone to Washington, and he's fallen into lockstep with his political party's leadership. As I said before, he votes the party line 96% of the time. My opponent and I are very different people with very different backgrounds and philosophies. When I was in Congress, I approached every issue with the interest of the people in mind, not the interest of my political party. I supported the President when I thought he was right, and I opposed him when I thought he was wrong. I never took orders from party leaders. We now have a dark cloud of suspicion and sleaze hanging over our Congress. As I said earlier, my opponent took $45,000 from criminals and convicted felons. He refuses to give it back. I didn't say it wasn't legal when he took it, but he refused to give it back. This is an ethical problem. Duke Cunningham is in jail. Bob Ney has pleaded guilty. Tom DeLay has resigned in disgrace. My opponent sees nothing wrong with that. You heard him say that. It was legal. I didn't say they weren't legal. I said it was unethical. Do you see anything wrong with that? I do. Not enough members in Congress stand up to their party leaders. I will. We face a dangerous enemy in Iraq and many other parts of the world. We experience high costs of health care and prescription drugs. We worry about our job security and the financial well-being of our families. And what is Congress doing about it? Nothing. They're more concerned about keeping their power. They're more concerned about covering up for one another than looking out for the people of this great country. Our democracy has a great way of dealing with this dilemma. It's called the ballot box. My roots run deep here. I've been involved in the affairs of this community all my life. In Washington, I always stood up for what I thought was best for Kentuckians, not what was best for my political party. I'm running for Congress because I think I can make a difference once again. I will do my part to see that we win the war in Iraq and the war on terrorism. I will do my part to see that our soldiers and veterans are cared for. I will fight for affordable health care and prescription drugs. And I will do all I can to see that every American who wants a good paying job will get one. So I ask you, are you tired of a Congress that's doing nothing? Are you sick of the corruption and sleaze in Washington? Do you want a representative who puts your interest ahead of partisan politics? If you do, I ask for your support and your vote. I appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you and good night.
Mr. Lucas, thank you very much. And now 4 minutes for Mr. Davis's closing statement.
Thank you again to Legacy for organizing this debate and to Northern Kentucky University for hosting us. In closing, I want to talk about my views on Iraq, reiterate some of our accomplishments, and talk about what we can do together in the future. We all want to get our troops home, but we can't afford to fail. Senior military commanders tell me that if we leave too soon, Iraq will become an unstable state like Afghanistan was under Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. To leave behind a stable country that will be an ally in the war and to win the war on terror and get our troops home as soon as possible, we must do several things. Focus on internal security so the Iraqi economy can function and grow. Continue to hand off power to the Iraqi security forces and push them hard to do more. Engage other nations in the region diplomatically. Their interests and future are tied to our success in Iraq. If Iraq falls to the terrorists, it will be a more dangerous world for all nations. Continue to assist the Iraqis in building democratic institutions and ensure that Iraqi law rules the land and not violence perpetrated by terrorists. And continue to assist the Iraqis in bringing in tribal groups together, giving all Iraqis a stake in success of the new government. In my opening statement and throughout the debate, I've highlighted tangible results achieved in the district over the last 2 years. We've improved services that we offer from our congressional office. I've introduced and passed legislation in the House that will help those serving our nation. I've been an active and effective legislator who sees problems and works with members of both parties to solve them. I've worked with local officials to fund infrastructure and economic development projects that will help us bring new and better paying jobs to Kentucky. I've never hesitated to stand up to those in my own party to represent this district, whether it's on homeland security issues like port security, on raising the minimum wage, which I strongly supported and advocated, on budget priorities like funding community development block grants, or opposing Social Security privatization. If you send me back for a second term, I want to use my experience to work on larger, more complex, and more important solutions to problems that we face. We absolutely must reduce our dependence on foreign oil. I believe that we need to create a program along the magnitude of the space program of the 1960s to make that happen. It's critical to our national security and our ability to expand our economy in the future. I believe that coal to liquid technologies are particularly promising for our economy in Kentucky. The United States is the Saudi Arabia of coal. Using clean coal technologies, we can protect our environment, we can boost our economy, create thousands of new jobs, and provide alternative fuels while we reduce our dependency on foreign oil. We need a long-term program of government loan guarantees and other incentives to accomplish specific goals on a set timetable to get us started down the path of energy independence. I hope to continue my work on economic policies to create growth and opportunity as well. We must make the tax cuts permanent. Raising taxes now could be devastating to our economy. Instead of taking more money out of the economy, I believe that we need to let people keep more of what they'll earn so they'll reinvest it, creating new jobs and new taxpayers. We've seen tax revenues skyrocket due to the economic growth created by the tax cuts. To reverse that would hurt our economy. There's more that we can do for our local economic success. We have a thriving manufacturing economy in northern Kentucky. The new School for Informatics here at NKU and the Center for Manufacturing Competitiveness at Gateway Community and Technical College both promise continued growth and prosperity for this community. I've worked hard to assist our local government, education, and business leaders on these exciting new projects. In closing, I want you to know that I'm 100% pro-life, and I'm the only candidate who has received the endorsement of local, state, and national pro-life groups. I'm also proud of being the only candidate to announce bipartisan public endorsements from local elected officials, thanks to our efforts to work across party lines to get things done for northern Kentucky. Instead of vague calls for change backed only by partisan rhetoric, I've tried to be specific about what I've done and also about my vision for what we have left to accomplish. Thank you for your time and consideration tonight. I ask you for your vote and your support on November 7th.
Very well, Mr. Davis. Our thanks to the candidates for taking part tonight and to our panel, Dan Hassert of the Kentucky Post, John Cannon of the Independent in Ashland, Jamie Baker Nance from the Grant County News, and Patrick Crowley of the Kentucky Inquirer. If you missed any part of tonight's debate, or if you want to see parts of it again, an on-demand webcast is available online at WCPO.com. There you will also find an audio-only podcast. We'd like to extend a special thanks to Legacy for putting tonight's debate together. We'd also like to thank Duke Energy, the Kentucky Post, and WNKU Radio for their sponsorship. And, of course, our deep gratitude tonight to our hosts here at Northern Kentucky University. And to our extremely polite audience here in Regents Hall tonight. This reminder, Election Day is November 7th, and we strongly urge you to get out and exercise your right to vote. I'm Clyde Gray of 9 News. Thank you for watching and listening, and good night. Yes, sir. Good job. Thank you.
Broadcasting, a part of the family of Scripps Networks.